Hi, in this video we're going to talk about how to dimension a building or a kind of any element. Okay, so typically what happens is like this is your floor plan, this is the inside, this is the outside. So when you're dimensioning, you need to be mindful of rather over dimensioning than under dimensioning. So you need to basically read it as if no one knows or there are multiple people that are going to be dimensioning and they're going to be dimensioning different things, and it's going to be there's a lot of tape measures, and it's quite a process to set out a building. There's set out dimensions, and there's internal dimensions, and there's opening dimensions, there's wall thickness dimensions, all those things you need to dimension. The best way to do it is to have your drawings, your dimensioning happening on the outside of the building. So for example, here we have elevation or a kind of a facade of a wall of a building. What I typically will do is I'll say, okay, you dimension from the inside to the outside. So what that means is, for example, I'll take, let's say this is a 220, just get rid of this, sorry. This is a 220 wall. So what I'll do is I'll dimension the inside dimension, right, over here. And then I'll add the wall thicknesses. So these are probably 220s, so we can just add that. Also for our offices, we typically use 220 and 110. Please don't use 230 and 115. Don't show plaster, anything like that. Thicknesses are not required because people don't measure and dimension off plaster thickness. They measure off the actual structural line. When you're building a building, you don't measure, oh, the plaster is 110 thick. I need to keep that in mind when I'm setting out the brick wall. No, you set out the brick, not the plaster. Okay, so in first line that you'll dimension is going to be your wall thickness and the internal dimension of that kind of facade. The next dimension will be to dimension the panels. So for example, this is a panel, this is another panel, this is a panel, that's a panel, and that's a panel to the outside, not the inside. Okay, so that's exactly what that dimension line will do on the outside, is that I'm just going to do like an eyeball this. Panel, so you got the, like I said, you've got all those dimension lines. And then the final dimension that you do for this facade is essentially the set out dimension, which is the total length. Okay, that's essentially from the outside line to the outside line. So for each wall, you essentially will have three dimensions: internal dimension, the external panel dimension, and then the external total overall dimension. Now, if you have a post, for instance, a structural post in the middle, let's say it's something a little bit off, these are squares, sorry, not rectangular, blobs. The thing with a post is because a post will grow in size or change in size, and you can't determine that, you're not the engineer will do that. You dimension to the center line of the post. So this is a little bit off, but basically that's where that would be. Same as this one, it'll be off the center line. And it's always good to actually dimension, or sorry, to draw the grid. So draw this grid, and that grid, and that grid. So this will be here, and then you dimension to the grid line. Right? And then you will then also dimension the grid line to the wall if you have walls and grid lines together. If you only have grid lines, you don't have walls, that's also fine. Okay. Then the next thing is, let's say you have a wall that does this. Let's say it's a toilet cubicle inside your building. So this is your building, and there's a toilet cubicle over there, and there's a door here, right? Now, you can't dimension this from the outside. If you were to put a dimension line here, without having proper long guidelines that took you to where you're dimensioning, it's going to be very tricky for anyone to know what you are dimensioning, what you're referring to rather with that dimension. So what you need to do is then do an internal dimension that then essentially is one long line. And for this one, again, there are two types of dimensions. You can do them right next to each other. You can dimension this opening width, so from that dimension, the wall thickness, and then this opening, this total internal dimension, it's this internal dimension, the wall thickness, and then this internal dimension. Now you could show it exactly where I've shown it. It doesn't have to be where I've indicated it. and then what you would do is you would do the same thing. You would have the panel thickness, so the dimension from this internal wall to the door, where the door starts, to the opening of the door, to the outside wall, right? So we're doing the panel, and then the last one you would do an overall for this entire wall. And again, this is for setting out. Okay, and then you would do the same for this side as well. But because this has only got 2 dimensions, essentially you would have 2 lines. You would have the overall, and then you would have the internal and the wall thickness. Now, the internal and wall thickness you can very easily do over here. The problem is that this room will probably have things in it. Bathroom is a toilet, basin, whatever it may be, and then the drawing becomes very cluttered. So it's better to have those things on the outside of that dimension. Then it sorts that problem. All right, and then so that's for plan dimensions. Yeah, I think that's enough for now.